Billionaire waited furious in his office for his ex to sign the divorce, until she arrived with twins. Before we begin, drop a comment telling us which city you're watching from, and once the story ends, don't forget to rate it from 0 to 10. Oh, and make sure to follow our channel for more stories like this. Now, sit back and enjoy every detail. The 42nd floor of the Meridian Tower offered a commanding view of Manhattan's skyline, but Tobias Morrow barely noticed the sprawling city below. His steel-gray eyes were fixed on the mahogany desk where divorce papers lay spread like accusations across the polished surface. At 39, he had built an empire in real estate, transforming empty lots into gleaming towers that pierced the clouds. Yet here he sat, unable to complete the simplest transaction of his life. Tobias ran his fingers through his dark hair, the silver threads at his temples catching the afternoon light. His tailored charcoal suit hung perfectly on his 6'2" frame, every detail meticulously crafted, from his Italian leather shoes to the platinum watch that had been ticking away the minutes for the past hour. He embodied power and control, yet today, waiting for Ilara, he felt anything but in control. The intercom buzzed. "Mr. Morrow, your 3 o'clock appointment has arrived." His jaw tightened. 3 years. 3 years since they had separated, and still, the divorce remained unsigned. His legal team had been pressuring him for months to finalize everything. His mother called it unseemly to leave such matters unresolved. His business partners questioned his judgment, yet something had always held him back. Some stubborn part of him that refused to close that particular door. Tobias stood and straightened his tie, a habit from his nervous days before he had learned to command every room he entered. The reflection in the floor-to-ceiling windows showed a man who had everything, except the ability to let go of the one woman who had ever truly mattered. "Send her in," he said, his voice steady despite the storm brewing in his chest. The door opened, and his assistant stepped aside. For a moment, Tobias expected to see the Ilara he remembered, the woman with beautiful green eyes and auburn hair, who used to laugh at his terrible jokes and challenge him in ways that made him a better man. But the woman who entered his office was different, stronger perhaps. There was a quiet confidence in her posture that hadn't been there before, a certainty that came from facing life's hardest challenges alone. Ilara Quintana had always been beautiful, but at 32, she possessed a grace that took his breath away. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, revealing the elegant line of her neck. She wore a navy dress that was professional yet somehow soft, paired with comfortable flats instead of the heels she used to favor. Her green eyes, those eyes that had once looked at him with such love, now held a mixture of determination and something else he couldn't quite identify. "Hello, Tobias," she said, her voice carrying the same melodic quality that had drawn him to her at a charity gala 7 years ago. "Ilara," he gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Please sit. I know this has taken longer than either of us wanted." She remained standing, her hands clasped in front of her. "Actually, there's something I need to get from my car first. Something important." His brow furrowed. This wasn't how he had imagined this conversation would go. He had prepared for anger, for accusations about his delays, for the final bitter words that would close their chapter forever. He hadn't prepared for mystery. What could be so important that it couldn't wait until after we sign these papers? Ilara's lips curved into the faintest smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Trust me, Tobias. After 3 years of waiting, you can give me 5 more minutes." She turned to leave, pausing at the door. "Oh, and you might want to clear your schedule for the rest of the afternoon. This conversation is going to take longer than you think." The door closed behind her with a soft click, leaving Tobias alone with his confusion and a growing sense that his carefully ordered world was about to be turned completely upside down. He stared at the divorce papers, then at the door she had just walked through. In all his years of negotiations, of high-stakes deals worth billions, he had never felt so unprepared for what was coming next. Outside his window, the city continued its relentless pace, but time seemed suspended in his office. Whatever Ilara needed to retrieve from her car, whatever had put that look of quiet determination in her eyes, Tobias knew with absolute certainty that nothing would ever be the same again. What secret could Ilara be hiding that would change everything Tobias thought he knew about their separation? Tobias paced behind his desk, his usual composure cracking with each passing minute. He had built his fortune on reading people, on anticipating their moves before they made them. But Ilara had always been different. Even during their marriage, she had possessed an ability to surprise him that both thrilled and terrified him. The sound of the elevator chiming in the distance made him freeze mid-step. His heart hammered against his ribs as footsteps approached his office door. Not just one set, but what sounded like several. His assistant's voice was muffled through the thick walls, followed by Alara's gentle responses. When the door opened again, Tobias turned, expecting to see Alara alone. Instead, his world tilted on its axis. She stood in the doorway, no longer the composed woman who had left minutes earlier. Now she looked nervous, protective, as she maneuvered a double stroller into his pristine office. Two small faces peered up at him from beneath matching blue caps, faces that made his breath catch in his throat. The boys couldn't have been more than 2 or 3 years old, with dark hair that caught the light exactly like his own, and eyes that were unmistakably familiar. The one on the left had Alara's button nose, while the other possessed the strong jawline that Tobias saw in his mirror every morning. They were beautiful, perfect, and absolutely impossible. Alara. His voice came out strangled, barely above a whisper. What? Who are they? She closed the door behind her and moved the stroller closer, her hands trembling slightly as she knelt beside the children. Tobias, I'd like you to meet Oliver and Sebastian, your sons. The words hit him like a physical blow. He gripped the edge of his desk, his knuckles white against the dark wood. My sons? That's impossible. We separated 3 years ago, and they're obviously not. They're 2 years and 5 months old. Alara interrupted, her voice steady despite the tears threatening to spill from her eyes. I found out I was pregnant 2 weeks after you moved out. 2 weeks after you changed your phone number and had your assistant screen all my calls. Oliver, or was it Sebastian, began to fuss, and Alara immediately reached for him, lifting him from the stroller with practiced ease. The child settled against her shoulder, his tiny hand fisting in her hair. The gesture was so natural, so maternal, that it made Tobias's chest ache with a longing he didn't understand. I tried to tell you, she continued, her voice growing stronger. I called your office dozens of times, I sent emails, I even came here once, but security wouldn't let me up. You made it very clear that you wanted nothing to do with me. Tobias sank into his chair, his mind reeling. The timeline made sense. Horrifying, perfect sense. Their last fight had been about children. He had wanted to wait, to establish more security, to plan every detail. She had wanted to start trying, to embrace the beautiful uncertainty of parenthood. The argument had escalated until he had said things, cruel, final things that had driven her from their home. They were born premature, Alara said, adjusting Oliver in her arms while Sebastian remained in the stroller, watching his father with curious eyes. I spent 3 months in the NICU, wondering if they would survive, wondering if I should keep trying to reach a man who clearly didn't want to be found. Alara, He started to speak, but what could he possibly say? That he had been a coward, that he had been so terrified of not being the perfect father that he had chosen to be no father at all. Sebastian began to babble, reaching his chubby hands toward the golden letter opener on Tobias's desk. Without thinking, Tobias moved the sharp object out of reach, his protective instincts kicking in before his rational mind could catch up. They look like you, Alara observed, a sad smile playing at her lips. Everyone says so. Oliver has your stubborn streak. He refuses to eat anything green. And Sebastian? He's got your intensity. He studies everything like he's planning to buy it. Despite everything, Tobias found himself almost smiling. Then the full weight of the situation crashed over him. 3 years, Alara. I've missed 3 years of their lives. 2 years and 5 months. She corrected gently. And you didn't miss it. You chose not to be there. The words were delivered without malice, but they cut deeper than any accusation. She was right. He had made a choice, and now he was living with the consequences. Why now? He asked, his voice hoarse. Why bring them here today? Alara shifted Oliver to her other arm, meeting his gaze directly. Because they deserve to know their father. Because despite everything that happened between us, you're a good man, Tobias. And because, she paused, her voice catching, because I can't do this alone anymore. The admission hung between them like a bridge neither was sure they could cross. In the silence that followed, Sebastian let out a delighted squeal, clapping his hands as sunlight streamed through the windows and cast dancing shadows on the office walls. Tobias stared at his son, his sons, and felt something crack open in his chest, something that had been locked away for 3 years. But as he reached toward Sebastian, his phone buzzed with an urgent message that would complicate everything even further. Tobias stared at the urgent message on his phone screen, his blood running cold. The text was from his business partner, Marcus Whitfield. Emergency board meeting called. Hostile takeover attempt by Meridian Corp. Need you here now. His empire, everything he had spent 15 years building, was under attack. The irony wasn't lost on him that as he discovered he was a father, he might lose everything that had defined him as a man. What is it? Elara asked, noticing the color drain from his face. He looked up at her, at Oliver nestled against her shoulder, at Sebastian who was now trying to climb out of his stroller with determined little grunts. 3 hours ago, his biggest concern had been signing divorce papers. Now he was a father of twins facing the potential destruction of his life's work. I have to go, he said, already reaching for his jacket. There's a crisis at the company. Now? Ilara's voice carried a note of disbelief. Tobias, we need to talk about... I know. He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture she remembered from their most stressful arguments. God, Ilara, I know. But if I don't handle this right now, I might not have anything left to offer them. Sebastian had successfully escaped his stroller and was toddling toward the massive windows, his small hands leaving prints on the glass. Tobias moved instinctively, scooping him up before the toddler could hurt himself. The weight of the child in his arms was foreign yet somehow right, and for a moment the crisis faded. Dada, Sebastian said, looking up at him with wide, curious eyes. The single word hit Tobias like a lightning strike. He stared down at this little person, his son, who somehow recognized him despite never having met him before. He's been saying that for months, Ilara said quietly. Whenever he sees tall men in suits, I think he's been looking for you. Tobias felt his throat close up. He gently set Sebastian down, watching as the boy immediately grabbed onto his leg like an anchor. Miss Ilara, his assistant's voice came through the intercom. Mr. Whitfield is on line 1. He says it's extremely urgent. The moment shattered. Reality crashed back in and Tobias looked between his phone, his business crisis, and the family he never knew he had. Come with me, he said suddenly. What? To the emergency meeting. Bring them. I can't just walk away from them again. His voice grew stronger, more decisive, and I won't let some corporate raiders destroy what I've built for my son's future. Ilara hesitated. Tobias, a board meeting isn't exactly toddler-friendly, and Oliver gets cranky when he misses his nap. I have a private conference room with the adjoining lounge. Mrs. Patterson can watch them. He was already moving, his mind shifting into the strategic mode that had made him billions. Please, Ilara, I need you there. Something in his voice must have convinced her because she nodded and began gathering the diaper bag she had brought. Okay, but if this goes badly, it won't, he said with the confidence of a man who had never lost a fight that mattered. I've never had anything worth fighting for like this before. 30 minutes later, they were in the elevator descending to the executive conference room. Oliver had fallen asleep in his stroller, but Sebastian was wide awake, fascinated by the numbers changing on the elevator display. Tell me about the takeover, Ilara said, smoothing Oliver's dark hair. Meridian Corp. They've been buying up our smaller competitors and consolidating the market. I always knew they'd come for us eventually. His jaw tightened. What I didn't expect was for them to find investors willing to back a hostile bid. How bad is it? He looked at her, remembering how she had always been his soundboard during their marriage, the one person who could cut through his ego and help him see clearly. If they succeed, I lose controlling interest in my own company. Everything I've built, every project, every vision, it all becomes theirs to reshape or destroy. The elevator dinged, and the doors opened to reveal the executive floor in chaos. Assistants hurried between offices with stacks of documents. Lawyers huddled in intense conversations, and through the glass walls of the main conference room, Tobias could see the emergency board meeting already in session. Mr. Morrow, his head of security, approached. The board members are getting impatient. Mr. Whitfield has been trying to stall, but I'm here now, Tobias said, his voice cutting through the noise. He turned to Ilara. Mrs. Patterson will take you and the boys to the executive lounge. There are toys there from when board members bring their grandchildren. Ilara caught his arm as he started to leave. Tobias, he turned back to her. Fight for what matters, she said simply. He looked down at Sebastian, who was reaching for him, and at Oliver, still sleeping peacefully. Then he looked at Ilara, the woman he had loved and lost, who had carried his children alone while he hid behind walls of pride and fear. I intend to, he said. As he walked toward the conference room where his enemies waited, Tobias Morrow felt something he hadn't experienced in years. He was fighting not just for himself but for the future of the family. He was just beginning to understand he couldn't live without. But the sight that greeted him through the conference room glass made his steps falter. Sitting at his own boardroom table was someone he never expected to see again, someone whose presence changed everything. Through the glass walls of the conference room, Tobias saw a face that made his blood turn to ice. Sitting at his own mahogany table, wearing an immaculate navy suit and a smile that had once charmed investors out of millions, was Victoria Ashford, his former business partner, former lover, and the woman who had tried to destroy him 5 years ago. Victoria looked exactly as he remembered, platinum blonde hair styled in a perfect chignon, piercing blue eyes that missed nothing, and the kind of polished beauty that graced magazine covers. She had aged gracefully, her 38 years evident only in the subtle lines around her eyes when she smiled, a smile that had once convinced him she loved him before she attempted to steal his company and run off with his biggest client. "Sir?" Marcus Whitfield appeared at his elbow, sweat beading on his forehead despite the air conditioning. "The board is waiting. We need to move fast. They've already made their opening offer." Tobias straightened his tie, his mind racing. Victoria's presence wasn't a coincidence. She was Meridian Corp's secret weapon, the inside knowledge that made their takeover bid so precisely targeted. "Give me 2 minutes with my family," he said, surprising himself with how naturally the word family rolled off his tongue. "Then I'll end this." He walked to the executive lounge where Mrs. Patterson, his assistant of 15 years, was sitting on the floor building blocks with Sebastian, while Oliver napped on the leather couch. Ilara stood by the window, her arms wrapped around herself as she watched the city below. "That's quite a view," she said without turning around. "Ilara." He moved to stand beside her, close enough to catch the familiar scent of her vanilla perfume. "There's something I need to tell you about what's happening in there." She faced him, and he saw the worry in her green eyes. "It's not just business, is it? The woman leading this takeover attempt. Her name is Victoria Ashford. We have history." Ilara's expression didn't change, but he caught the slight tightening around her eyes. "What kind of history?" "We were partners once, in business, and—" He ran a hand through his hair. "She was in my life before you, Ilara, before I knew what love actually meant. She tried to steal your company before, didn't she?" Ilara's voice was quiet but sharp. "I remember you mentioning her once, early in our marriage. You said she taught you never to mix business with personal feelings." Tobias nodded, impressed as always by her intuition. 5 years ago she nearly succeeded, cost me $50 million and almost destroyed my reputation. Now she's back, and she knows exactly where to hit me where it hurts." Sebastian toddled over, pulling on Tobias's pant leg. Without thinking, Tobias lifted him up, and the boy immediately began playing with his father's tie. "Why are you telling me this?" Ilara asked. "Because if I lose this fight, if she takes my company, I won't have anything to offer you. To offer them." He looked down at Sebastian, who was trying to unknot his tie with serious concentration. "And because I want you to know that whatever happens in there, whatever she says or does, you're the only woman I've ever loved enough to marry." Ilara's breath caught, but before she could respond, Marcus burst into the lounge. "Tobias, we're out of time. They're calling for a vote." Tobias kissed the top of Sebastian's head and handed him back to Mrs. Patterson. "I'll be back," he promised, looking directly at Ilara. The conference room fell silent when he entered. 12 board members sat around the polished table, their faces grave. At the head of the table, Victoria rose gracefully, extending her hand as if they were old friends. "Hello, darling," she purred, her voice carrying the slight British accent she'd cultivated during her years in London. "You look well. Success suits you." He ignored her outstretched hand and took his seat at the opposite end of the table. "Victoria, I'd say it's good to see you, but we both know I don't lie well." Her laugh was light, musical, still so direct. "It's one of the things I always admired about you." "Cut the act," he said coldly. "What do you want?" "What I've always wanted, Tobias. What should have been mine from the beginning." Her blue eyes hardened. 51% of Morrow Enterprises. The offer was bold, precisely calculated to give her controlling interest while leaving him with just enough to feel the sting of defeat. Around the table, he could see some board members wavering. Victoria had always been persuasive. "The offer is generous," said board member Catherine Mills. "Meridian Corp is promising to retain all current employees and honor existing contracts." "Of course they are," Tobias replied. Until the ink is dry. Then what, Victoria? You gut the company, sell off the profitable divisions and leave the rest to rot? I prefer the term restructuring, Victoria said smoothly. We live in different times now, Tobias. Your romantic approach to business isn't sustainable in today's market. My romantic approach has built this company from a single office to a billion-dollar enterprise. Yes, but at what cost? Victoria's voice softened with false sympathy. I heard about your divorce, darling. All those years building an empire while your marriage crumbled. Was it worth it? The question hit its mark, but not in the way Victoria intended. Tobias thought about Alara in the next room, about Oliver and Sebastian, about the family he had almost lost forever because he had prioritized exactly what Victoria was accusing him of. Success over love. You're right, he said, surprising everyone in the room. I did make mistakes. I did put business before the people I cared about. But that's changing. Victoria's smile faltered slightly. This wasn't the response she had expected, which is why, Tobias continued, standing slowly, I'm not going to let someone who understands neither love nor loyalty anywhere near my company. He pressed a button on the conference table's control panel. The room screens lit up with documents, financial records, and email chains. Ladies and gentlemen, meet the real Victoria Ashford, the woman who embezzled $3 million from Ashford Holdings before fleeing to Europe. The woman who's been systematically buying Morrow Enterprises stock through shell companies for the past 18 months. And the woman who's been feeding inside information to our competitors. Victoria's face went white as the evidence mounted on the screens around them. How did you, she began, get this information? Tobias smiled coldly. I've had investigators watching you since the moment you set foot back in New York 6 months ago. Did you really think I'd forget what you were capable of? The room erupted in murmurs as board members studied the evidence. Victoria's carefully constructed facade began to crumble. But as security moved to escort her from the building, Victoria stood and delivered one final blow that changed everything. Congratulations on winning this battle, darling. But you might want to ask your lovely ex-wife why she really came to see you today. Because I know something about dear Alara that you don't. Victoria's words hung in the air like poison, and Tobias felt the ground shift beneath his feet. Around the conference table, board members exchanged uncomfortable glances, sensing the personal drama unfolding before them. You have 30 seconds to explain yourself before security removes you, Tobias said, his voice dangerously quiet. Victoria smoothed her skirt and smiled with the satisfaction of someone playing her final devastating card. Tell me, darling, did sweet Alara mention why she waited 3 years to tell you about the children? Why she chose today, of all days, to bring them here? Because she tried to reach me and I wouldn't take her calls, Tobias replied, but uncertainty crept into his voice. Oh, she tried to reach you, certainly, but not for the reasons you think. Victoria pulled out her phone and scrolled through what appeared to be a series of photographs. 6 months ago, your ex-wife came to see me in London. The room went dead silent. Tobias felt his heart stop. That's impossible, he said. But even as the words left his mouth, he remembered something. Alara mentioning a business trip to Europe earlier that year. She had said it was for a consulting job, something about international marketing. Victoria turned her phone toward him, showing a photograph of Alara sitting across from her at what looked like an expensive London restaurant. The timestamp showed it was taken 6 months ago. She was quite desperate, actually, Victoria continued, her voice dripping with false sympathy. Struggling financially, you see. The medical bills from the premature births, the ongoing therapy costs for little Sebastian. He has developmental delays, doesn't he? All very expensive for a single mother. Tobias's mind reeled. Sebastian did seem smaller than Oliver, more cautious in his movements. Had Alara been dealing with medical issues alone while he lived in luxury? What did she want from you? He managed to ask. Information, darling. About your business dealings, your financial status, your weaknesses. She said she needed leverage to ensure you'd provide proper support for the children. Victoria's smile was cruel. I must say she was quite thorough in her questions about your assets and investment strategies. The implication hit him like a physical blow. Victoria was suggesting that Alara had been gathering intelligence, planning this moment, using their children as weapons in some elaborate scheme. You're lying, he said, but doubt crept into his voice. Am I? Victoria slid a small recording device across the table. I always record my business meetings. Would you like to hear your beloved ex-wife discussing the best way to manipulate your emotions? She was particularly interested in timing, when you'd be most vulnerable, most likely to give her what she wanted. Tobias stared at the device as if it were a snake. Everything he thought he knew about today, about Alara's courage in coming here, about her vulnerability, about their potential reconciliation, suddenly felt orchestrated. "Sir," Marcus whispered urgently, "perhaps we should discuss this privately." "Play it," Tobias commanded, his voice hollow. Victoria pressed play, and Alara's voice filled the room, clear and unmistakable. "I need to know his pressure points, Victoria. What makes him act impulsively? What would make him sign anything I put in front of him without reading it carefully?" The recording continued, capturing what sounded like Alara planning an elaborate manipulation. But something about it felt wrong. The tone was too cold, too calculating for the woman he knew. "I know this is hard to accept," Victoria said with mock compassion, "but your precious Alara played you, darling. The tears, the children, the perfect timing. It was all a performance." Tobias's hands clenched into fists. Rage and heartbreak warred in his chest. Had everything, her vulnerability, his growing feelings for his sons, the possibility of rebuilding their family, been an elaborate lie? But as Victoria reached for the recording device, clearly pleased with the chaos she'd created, Tobias noticed something that made his blood run cold. The timestamp on the recording was wrong. It showed a date from last week, not 6 months ago. "Marcus," he said quietly, "call building security. I want to see the elevator surveillance from 6 months ago. Every visitor log, every security camera." Victoria's confident smile flickered. "And get me the original metadata from that audio file," he continued, his voice gaining strength. "Right now." "Tobias, there's no need to," Victoria started. "There's every need." He stood, towering over her. "Because that recording was made last week, wasn't it? You had someone impersonate Alara's voice, probably using AI voice synthesis." Victoria's face went pale, but she maintained her composure. "You're being paranoid. The photograph is real," he continued, his mind working rapidly. "Alara was in London 6 months ago, but not to see you. She was there getting medical treatment for Sebastian, wasn't she? Treatment that insurance wouldn't cover in the States." The pieces clicked together with devastating clarity. Alara had taken their son abroad for specialized therapy, probably spending everything she had to give Sebastian the best chance at normal development. Meanwhile, Tobias had been living in luxury, completely oblivious to their struggles. "Security has the visitor logs, sir," Marcus reported, holding up his tablet. "No record of Alara Quintana ever visiting Victoria Ashford's hotel or any property associated with her during her London stay." Victoria's mask finally slipped, revealing the desperation beneath. "It doesn't matter. The fact remains that she waited 3 years. To protect our children from discovering their father was a coward," Tobias finished. "To protect them from the kind of person who would abandon his family when they needed him most." He turned to face the board members who had witnessed this ugly scene. "Meeting adjourned. Mrs. Ashford's offer is rejected unanimously. Security will escort her from the premises." As security moved toward Victoria, she made one last desperate attempt. "You'll regret this, Tobias. She doesn't love you, she never did. She's only here for your money." But Tobias was already walking toward the door, his only thought reaching the lounge where Alara waited with their children. He had to explain, had to apologize, had to somehow undo the damage that 3 years of pride and fear had created. He pushed open the lounge door to find Alara packing the diaper bag with quick, efficient movements. Oliver was in his stroller, fully awake now, while Sebastian sat on the floor playing with blocks. All three looked up when he entered, and the expression on Alara's face told him everything. She had heard every word through the thin walls. "Alara, please," he started. "We should go," she said quietly, not meeting his eyes. "The boys need dinner, and it's clear we've complicated your day enough." The distance in her voice was worse than any accusation. She believed he had doubted her even for a moment. As she lifted Sebastian into his stroller, Tobias realized that Victoria's greatest victory wasn't the failed takeover. It was the seed of doubt she had planted between him and the woman he was only just beginning to love again. Tobias watched helplessly as Alara secured Oliver and Sebastian in their stroller, her movements precise and controlled, the same way she used to organize their closet when she was upset during their marriage. She was building walls again, brick by brick, and he could see his family slipping away before he'd even had the chance to truly find them. "Alara, please don't go. Not like this." She finally looked at him, and the pain in her green eyes made his chest ache. "What would you like me to say, Tobias? That I understand why you believed her even for a moment? That it's okay that you thought I was capable of using our children as pawns?" I didn't believe her, he said desperately. I knew something was wrong with that recording from the beginning. I was just... You hesitated. The words were quiet but devastating. For 30 seconds you looked at me and wondered if I was lying to you, if everything about today was some elaborate con. Sebastian reached up from his stroller, making grabbing motions toward Tobias. The little boy's simple gesture of trust made the moment even more painful. "Dada," Sebastian said again, and Ilara's composure finally cracked. "Don't," she whispered, tears threatening. "Don't make this harder than it already is." Tobias knelt down in front of the stroller, bringing himself to eye level with his sons. Oliver was chewing on a small stuffed elephant, but Sebastian was watching him with those intense eyes that mirrored his own. "How bad is it?" he asked quietly. Sebastian's condition. Ilara's hand stilled on the stroller handle. "What?" Victoria mentioned developmental delays, medical bills. "Is that why you were in London?" She was quiet for so long that he thought she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. He was born at 28 weeks. Both of them were, but Sebastian had more complications. Respiratory distress, feeding issues, muscle tone problems. She touched Sebastian's cheek gently. "The doctors here said he might always be behind, that we should just accept it. But there was a specialist in London, Dr. Hartwell. He developed a new therapy protocol that was showing remarkable results." Tobias felt his throat close. "How much did it cost?" "It doesn't matter." "Ilara, how much?" She met his eyes defiantly. $200,000, plus living expenses for 3 months while he received treatment. The number hit him like a physical blow. While he had been buying handmade Italian suits and vintage wines, she had been selling everything she owned to save their son. "My grandmother's jewelry," she continued, her voice stronger now, as if confessing the truth was liberating. "The car. I sold the engagement ring you gave me, emptied my savings account, took a second mortgage on my house. I would have sold my soul if it meant giving Sebastian a chance at a normal life." Tobias closed his eyes, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what she had endured alone. "Did it work? The treatment?" A small smile crossed her face as she looked down at Sebastian, who was now trying to unbuckle himself from the stroller. 6 months ago, doctors said he might never walk properly. Look at him now. Sebastian had indeed managed to free himself and was standing beside the stroller, gripping the edge for balance but supporting most of his own weight. It was a miracle that Tobias had almost missed entirely. "I could have helped," he said, his voice thick with regret. "If you had been able to reach me, but I couldn't reach you," she interrupted. "Your assistant had very clear instructions. No calls from Ilara Quintana, no messages, no exceptions." The accusation hung between them. She was right. He had made it impossible for her to contact him, so determined had he been to move on with his life. "Why didn't you take me to court? For child support, for acknowledgement of paternity? You had every right." "Because I didn't want your money out of obligation." Her voice grew fierce. "I wanted them to know their father because he chose to be in their lives, not because a judge forced him to write checks." The strength in her voice, the fierce protectiveness, made him remember why he had fallen in love with her in the first place. Ilara had always been a fighter, but she fought for others, never for herself. "I'm choosing now," he said urgently. "I'm choosing to be their father. I'm choosing to be in their lives. I'm choosing you." She shook her head, tears finally spilling over. "It's not that simple, Tobias. You can't just decide to be a family because it's convenient now. They need stability, not a father who's going to disappear the moment things get difficult." "I won't disappear. How can I believe that?" The question was raw, desperate. "You disappeared from our marriage when things got hard. You disappeared when I needed you most. What makes this time different?" Before he could answer, Sebastian toddled toward him, stumbling slightly but determined. Without thinking, Tobias reached out to steady him, and the little boy grabbed his hand with surprising strength. "Different," Sebastian said clearly, looking up at his father. It was the first word other than "Dada" that Tobias had heard him say, and the timing was so perfect, so impossibly meaningful, that all 3 adults froze. "Did he just—" Tobias began. "That's his newest word," Ilara said, wonder creeping into her voice despite everything. "He's been saying it all week whenever something changes. Different toy, different food, different place." Tobias looked down at Sebastian, who was still gripping his hand and smiling up at him with complete trust. In that moment, he understood what his son was trying to tell him. This was different. Everything about this moment, this second chance, this family, It was all different from the man he used to be. "You're right," he said, meeting Ilara's eyes. "I can't prove that I've changed with words, but let me show you. Let me prove that I'm different now." Oliver began to fuss, and Ilara automatically reached for him, lifting him from the stroller with practiced ease. The sight of her with both boys, managing everything alone as she had for 3 years, made Tobias's chest ache with admiration and regret. "How?" she asked, shifting Oliver to her hip. "How do you prove something like that?" Tobias pulled out his phone and made a call that surprised them both. "Marcus, cancel everything on my schedule for the next 2 weeks. Personal leave, effective immediately." He listened to his business partner's protests for a moment, then cut him off. "No, not a vacation. I'm learning how to be a father." He hung up and looked at Ilara, who was staring at him in shock. "2 weeks," he said. "Give me 2 weeks to show you that I'm not the same man who walked away from our marriage. Let me help with Sebastian's therapy, with Oliver's doctor appointments, with bedtime stories and diaper changes and all the things I should have been doing from the beginning." Ilara was quiet for a long time, studying his face as if trying to read his soul. Finally she spoke. "My apartment only has 2 bedrooms. It took him a moment to realize what she was saying. Not yes, but not no either. It was the beginning of a negotiation, the first step toward something that might eventually become trust. But before he could respond, Sebastian tugged on his hand and pointed toward the window, where the afternoon sun was setting over the city. "Home?" the little boy asked, looking between his parents with hopeful eyes. The question hung in the air, loaded with possibility and pain, hope and fear. Home, such a simple concept, yet so complex when it involved 3 years of separation, 2 children who barely knew their father, and 2 adults who were afraid to trust their hearts again. Ilara's apartment in Brooklyn was nothing like the penthouse they had shared during their marriage. The living room was small but warm, filled with colorful toys, children's books scattered across a well-worn coffee table, and family photos that made Tobias's heart ache. In every picture he saw the life he had missed. First steps, birthday parties, Christmas mornings, all celebrated without him. "The couch pulls out," Ilara said, setting down the diaper bag and immediately moving into the familiar routine of arriving home with 2 toddlers. "There are clean sheets in the hallway closet." Oliver was cranky from missing his nap and clung to his mother's leg, while Sebastian explored the living room with renewed energy, clearly happy to be in familiar surroundings. Tobias stood awkwardly near the door, unsure where he fit in this carefully orchestrated chaos. "What can I do?" he asked. Ilara paused in unpacking snacks from the diaper bag. "Sebastian needs his afternoon medication. It's in the kitchen, the blue bottle. 1 teaspoon with juice." The simple task felt monumental. Tobias had negotiated billion-dollar deals, but measuring medicine for his son seemed infinitely more important and terrifying. In the small kitchen he found the blue bottle and read the label carefully. Sebastian Quintana Morrow for muscle tone support. The hyphenated name hit him like a revelation. Even without his presence, even without his acknowledgement, Ilara had given their sons his name. "She kept your name," he whispered to himself, then louder. "Ilara, why did you give them my name?" From the living room, her voice carried a note of exhaustion. "Because they deserved to know who their father was even if he didn't want to know them." The words stung, but they also revealed something beautiful. Despite everything, despite his abandonment, she had still believed in the possibility that he might one day want to be their father. He returned to the living room with Sebastian's medicine, but the little boy was nowhere to be seen. Panic flashed through him. "Where's Sebastian?" "Probably in his room," Ilara said calmly, settling Oliver on the couch with a sippy cup. "He likes to play with his trains when he gets home." Tobias found Sebastian's room at the end of the hallway. It was painted pale blue with glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling, and an elaborate train set covering most of the floor. Sebastian sat in the middle of it all, carefully arranging the cars in a specific order. "Sebastian," Tobias called softly. "Medicine time." The little boy looked up and smiled, but when Tobias approached with the spoon, Sebastian shook his head vigorously and backed away. "No thank you," he said politely, using what was clearly a phrase Ilara had taught him. Tobias knelt down, remembering how he used to negotiate with difficult clients. "What if we make a deal? Medicine first, then we play trains?" Sebastian considered this, tilting his head in a gesture that was pure Tobias. "You play trains with me? I'd love to play trains with you." After the medicine was administered, With minimal fuss once Sebastian realized his father was serious about the train playing, Tobias found himself sprawled on the floor, learning the complex rules of Sebastian's train world. Each car had a name, a specific job, and a preferred place in the lineup. "This is Thomas," Sebastian explained, holding up the blue engine. "He's the leader. And this is Percy. He's little, but brave." "Like you," Tobias said without thinking. Sebastian beamed at the comparison, and something warm settled in Tobias's chest. For the first time in 3 years, he felt like he was exactly where he belonged. An hour later, Ilara appeared in the doorway. "Dinner's ready," she announced, but she stopped when she saw them together. Sebastian curled against Tobias's side, both of them focused on building an elaborate bridge for the trains. "He usually doesn't warm up to people this quickly," she said quietly. Tobias looked down at Sebastian, who was now dozing against his shoulder. "Maybe he recognizes something. Or maybe," Ilara said, her voice softer than it had been all day. "He's just been waiting for his dad." Dinner was a chaotic affair. Oliver threw more food than he ate. Sebastian insisted on feeding himself and ended up wearing more pasta sauce than consuming it, and both boys seemed to have endless energy despite their earlier naps. Tobias watched in amazement as Ilara handled it all with patient efficiency, cleaning faces, refilling cups, cutting food into safe sizes, all while maintaining a conversation about trains and dinosaurs, and whether clouds had feelings. "How do you do this every day?" he asked as she wiped Oliver's hands for the 3rd time. "You adapt," she said simply. "You learn that perfection isn't the goal. Survival is." After dinner, it was bath time, and Tobias discovered that 2 wet toddlers in a small bathtub created more chaos than he had ever imagined possible. Sebastian loved the water and wanted to stay in forever, while Oliver was ready to get out the moment he was clean. Managing both their needs simultaneously required a level of multitasking that made running a corporation seem simple. "Don't let Sebastian drink the bathwater," Ilara called from the hallway where she was gathering pajamas. "He thinks it's hilarious, but it's not exactly sanitary." Too late. Sebastian had already taken a gulp and was grinning at his father with mischievous delight. "Sebastian," Tobias said sternly, but he couldn't keep the smile out of his voice. "Bathwater is not for drinking. Tastes like bubbles," Sebastian replied, completely unrepentant. By the time both boys were clean, dressed in pajamas, and settled for bedtime stories, Tobias was exhausted in a way he had never experienced. Physical tiredness from his morning workouts was nothing compared to the mental and emotional energy required to care for 2 small children. "Are you having second thoughts?" Ilara asked as they stood in the hallway between the boys' rooms. He looked at her, really looked at her. Her hair was escaping from its ponytail. There was a mysterious stain on her shirt, probably from Oliver's dinner, and she looked as tired as he felt. But there was also something peaceful about her, a contentment that he remembered from their early marriage. "No," he said firmly. "I'm having first thoughts. Real thoughts about what it means to be a father, what it means to be a family." From Sebastian's room came a small voice. "Daddy, story." It was the first time Sebastian had called him Daddy instead of Dada, and the progression felt significant, earned. "I'll read to Sebastian if you want to put Oliver down," Tobias offered. Ilara nodded, and for a moment their hands brushed as they passed in the hallway. The simple contact sent warmth through him, a reminder of all the casual intimacies they had shared during their marriage. Small touches, brief kisses, the comfort of simply being near each other. Sebastian's chosen book was about a little train that could, and as Tobias read about the engine's determination to climb the mountain, he couldn't help but see parallels to their situation. The little train that said, I think I can, until he finally reached the top of the mountain and declared triumphantly, I thought I could. Can we climb mountains, Daddy? Sebastian asked sleepily. We can climb anything together, Tobias promised, tucking the blanket around his son's small frame. When he emerged from Sebastian's room, he found Ilara in the living room folding laundry with the mechanical precision of someone who had done this task thousands of times. Oliver went down easy? He was exhausted. They both were. She glanced up at him. How was story time? Perfect, he said, and meant it. They worked in comfortable silence for a few minutes, Tobias helping match tiny socks and fold miniature shirts. The domestic scene felt both foreign and familiar, like remembering a language he had once known fluently. Ilara, he said finally, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. She tensed slightly. Okay. When you were struggling, with the medical bills, with everything, Did you ever hate me? She was quiet for so long that he thought she wasn't going to answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was thoughtful rather than angry. I tried to. It would have been easier to hate you than to keep loving someone who wasn't there. She folded one of Sebastian's shirts with careful precision. But I couldn't hate the father of my children. I couldn't hate the man who gave me the two best things in my life. The simple honesty of her answer humbled him. She had every right to hate him, every reason to want revenge for his abandonment. Instead, she had protected his relationship with their children, even when he didn't deserve it. I don't know how to make up for 3 years, he said quietly. You don't, she replied. You can't change the past, but you can choose what happens next. Before he could respond, a cry came from Oliver's room. Not distressed, but not quite settled either. Ilara started to get up, but Tobias touched her arm gently. Let me try, he said. She hesitated, then nodded. He likes his back rubbed in slow circles, and sometimes he needs his stuffed elephant repositioned. Tobias found Oliver standing in his crib, tears streaming down his face. When he saw his father, he reached up with both arms, a gesture of trust that made Tobias's throat tight with emotion. It's okay, buddy, Tobias murmured, lifting him up. Daddy's here. As he rubbed Oliver's back and swayed gently, the little boy gradually relaxed, his breathing evening out. By the time Tobias laid him back down, Oliver was nearly asleep, clutching his elephant and watching his father with drowsy contentment. When Tobias returned to the living room, he found Ilara watching him with an unreadable expression. What? He asked. You're good at this, she said softly. Better than I expected. I have good teachers, he replied, gesturing toward the boys' rooms. But as they prepared the couch for him and said their careful goodnights, Tobias couldn't shake the feeling that he was being tested, not just by Ilara, but by circumstances beyond their control. Being a father for one evening was different from being a father for a lifetime. As he lay on the pull-out couch listening to the unfamiliar sounds of a family home at night, the hum of the refrigerator, the occasional murmur from one of the boys' rooms, the soft sound of Ilara moving around in her bedroom, Tobias realized that everything he thought he wanted from life had been wrong. But just as he was beginning to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could rebuild what they had lost, his phone buzzed with a message that threatened to destroy everything they had started to build. The message on Tobias's phone came from Dr. Harrison Chen, the pediatric neurologist who had been monitoring Sebastian's progress since his premature birth. The timestamp showed 11:47 p.m., and the urgency in the brief text made Tobias's blood run cold. Need to speak with you immediately regarding Sebastian's latest test results. Call me regardless of the hour. Tobias sat up on the pull-out couch, his heart hammering as he processed the implications. He had spent the evening falling in love with fatherhood, watching Sebastian arrange his trains with meticulous care, reading bedtime stories, feeling like he was finally becoming the man his family needed. Now, in the space of a single text message, everything felt fragile again. He looked toward the hallway where his family slept peacefully, unaware that their world might be about to shift again. The thought of waking Ilara with potentially devastating news made him hesitate, but keeping this from her would be another betrayal in a relationship already strained by too many secrets. Moving quietly to the kitchen, he dialed Dr. Chen's number. The phone rang twice before the doctor answered, his voice alert despite the late hour. Mr. Morrow, thank you for calling so quickly. What's wrong with Sebastian? Tobias asked, dispensing with pleasantries. The test results, how bad is it? There was a pause that lasted an eternity. I need to be very clear about something first. When did Ilara tell you about Sebastian's condition? The question confused him. Today, she mentioned the premature birth, the developmental delays, the treatment in London. And did she tell you about the latest MRI results from last week? No. A chill ran down Tobias's spine. Should she have? Dr. Chen's sigh was audible through the phone. Mr. Morrow, I sent those results to Ilara 5 days ago. The scans show something we've been monitoring since Sebastian's birth, a small but significant abnormality in his brain development that could affect his motor skills and cognitive function as he grows. Tobias gripped the phone tighter. What kind of abnormality? Paraventricular leukomalacia. It's a form of brain injury that sometimes occurs in premature babies. The good news is that Sebastian's case is mild, and with continued therapy his prognosis is quite positive. The concerning news is that he'll need specialized treatment for the next several years, possibly including surgery when he's older. The words hit Tobias like physical blows. Surgery, years of treatment, his little boy, who had just learned to climb mountains in bedtime stories, facing challenges that no child should have to endure. What does this mean for his future? He managed to ask. With proper care, Sebastian can live a relatively normal life. He may always be slightly delayed in some areas, but many children with similar conditions go on to have successful, fulfilling lives. The key is consistent long-term medical support. And the cost? Another pause. Substantial. The insurance coverage will help, but there will be significant out-of-pocket expenses. Specialized therapy, potential surgery, ongoing monitoring. We're looking at several $100,000 over the next decade. Tobias closed his eyes, understanding beginning to dawn. How long has Alara known about this specific diagnosis? The formal diagnosis came 3 months ago, but we've been monitoring these concerns since Sebastian's birth. Alara has been remarkably strong throughout this process. Remarkably strong. The phrase echoed in Tobias's mind as pieces clicked into place. Alara's hesitation today, her concern about his commitment, her insistence that the children needed stability. She hadn't just been protecting them from potential disappointment. She had been preparing to handle Sebastian's medical future alone, just as she had handled everything else. Dr. Chen, I need to ask you something confidential. Has Alara been struggling financially with Sebastian's care? The doctor's hesitation told him everything. I can't discuss specific financial details, but I will say that Alara has made significant sacrifices to ensure Sebastian receives the best possible care. She's explored every option, exhausted every resource, including, Tobias realized, coming to him today. Not as manipulation or revenge, but as a last resort. A desperate mother seeking help for her child from the one person who had both the means and the responsibility to provide it. Thank you, Dr. Chen. I'll discuss this with Alara and we'll schedule a follow-up appointment. Mr. Morrow, for what it's worth, Sebastian is a remarkable little boy. With the right support, his future is very bright. After hanging up, Tobias stood in the darkened kitchen, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what Alara had been carrying alone. She had come to him today not because she wanted to manipulate him, but because she was drowning, and he was the only lifeline available for their son. A soft sound from the hallway made him turn. Alara stood in the doorway wearing an oversized t-shirt and pajama pants, her hair tousled from sleep. She looked younger, more vulnerable, and when she saw his expression, her face immediately filled with concern. What's wrong? She asked, moving toward him. Is it work? Did Victoria? Dr. Chen called, he said quietly. Her face went pale, and he watched as she processed the implications. He told you about the latest results. Why didn't you tell me, Alara? Today when we were talking about Sebastian's treatment, about the medical bills, why didn't you mention the PVL diagnosis? She leaned against the kitchen counter as if she needed the support. Because I didn't want you to stay out of pity. I didn't want you to help us because you felt sorry for the sick child. So you were planning to handle it alone? Again? I've been handling it alone for 3 years, she said, a flash of her old strength returning. I can handle it for 3 more or 30 more if I have to. But you shouldn't have to. The words came out more forcefully than he intended. He's my son too, Alara. His medical needs, his future, the cost of his care, that's my responsibility. Is it? The question was soft but devastating. Because 3 years ago, when I was facing the possibility that both babies might not survive, when I was living in the NICU and making decisions about life support and experimental treatments, I was doing it alone. Where was your sense of responsibility then? The accusation hit its mark because it was absolutely true. While she had been fighting for their children's lives, he had been sulking about the end of their marriage, completely oblivious to the battle she was waging. You're right, he said. I failed them then. I failed you. But I'm here now and I want to help. I want to be the father they need, the partner you need. For how long? The question came out broken, desperate. Until the medical bills get overwhelming? Until Sebastian needs surgery and therapy consumes our entire lives? Until being a father becomes inconvenient for your business schedule? Before he could answer, a small voice called from the hallway. Mommy? Daddy? They both turned to see Sebastian standing in the doorway, his hair sticking up in impossible directions, clutching his stuffed train to his chest. He looked between his parents with sleepy confusion. What's wrong? He asked, his young voice carrying a wisdom that broke Tobias's heart. Alara immediately moved to him, kneeling down to his level. Nothing's wrong, baby. Mommy and Daddy were just talking. You look sad. Sebastian observed, reaching up to touch his mother's cheek. Tobias watched this exchange and felt something crack open inside his chest. This little boy, his son, was facing challenges that would test him for years to come, yet he was more concerned about his mother's tears than his own problems. "Can I tell you something, Sebastian?" Tobias said, kneeling down beside Alara. Sebastian nodded solemnly. "Sometimes grown-ups have big feelings, just like you do, and sometimes we need to talk about important things that affect our family. But you know what never changes? What? How much Mommy and Daddy love you. No matter what happens, no matter what challenges we face, that love never goes away." Sebastian considered this with the seriousness of a much older child. Even if I'm different? The question revealed so much that despite his young age, Sebastian understood he wasn't like other children, that he faced challenges others didn't. It also revealed how carefully Alara had been protecting him, helping him feel loved and valued despite his differences. "Especially because you're different," Tobias said, his voice thick with emotion. "Different can be wonderful, Sebastian. Different can be brave and strong and special." Sebastian smiled and leaned against his father, apparently satisfied with this answer. "Can you carry me back to bed, Daddy?" As Tobias lifted his son and carried him back to his room, he caught Alara's eye over Sebastian's head. The look that passed between them was complex. Gratitude, hope, and lingering fear all mixed together. After Sebastian was settled back in bed, they returned to the kitchen. The conversation that had been interrupted still hung between them, but something fundamental had shifted. "I'm not going anywhere, Alara," Tobias said firmly. "Whatever Sebastian needs, whatever this family needs, I'm here for it. Not out of pity, not out of obligation, but because you're my family, and I love you, all of you." Alara studied his face in the dim kitchen light, searching for something. Sincerity, perhaps, or the strength to trust again. "The medical bills alone will be staggering," she said quietly, "and that's if everything goes well. If Sebastian needs surgery, if there are complications, then we'll handle it. Together. What if your board objects to the expenses? What if it affects your business? Then they'll object." His voice grew stronger, more certain. "Alara, I spent 3 years thinking that my business was the most important thing in my life. Today, I held my son while he called me Daddy, and I realized I've been living my life completely backwards." She was quiet for a long moment, and when she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "I'm scared, Tobias. I'm scared to hope that this time might be different. I'm scared to let the boys get attached to you and then have you leave when things get difficult." "I'm scared too," he admitted. "I'm terrified that I won't be good enough, that I'll fail them again, but I'm more terrified of missing another moment of their lives." As they stood together in the quiet kitchen, surrounded by the gentle sounds of their sleeping children, Tobias felt the weight of the future settling around them. There would be medical appointments and therapy sessions, financial stress and difficult decisions. There would be moments of fear and uncertainty, times when love might not feel like enough. But there would also be bedtime stories and train sets, first words and proud moments, the daily miracles of watching two remarkable little boys grow into the men they were meant to become. As Alara reached for his hand in the darkness, linking their fingers together for the first time in 3 years, Tobias knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them the way Sebastian approached his toy trains, one careful, determined step at a time. 3 weeks into their fragile new arrangement, Tobias had begun to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could make this unconventional family work. He had learned the intricate routine of morning medications, mastered the art of convincing Oliver to eat vegetables, and discovered that Sebastian's physical therapy sessions were both heartbreaking and inspiring to watch. Most importantly, he had seen glimpses of the woman he fell in love with returning to Alara's eyes, moments when her guard dropped and she laughed at his attempts to braid her hair, or smiled when he sang ridiculous songs during bath time. Then Sebastian collapsed during breakfast on a Thursday morning, and their carefully constructed world shattered. It happened without warning. One moment Sebastian was methodically eating his cereal, arranging the pieces by color as he always did, and the next he was convulsing on the kitchen floor while Oliver screamed from his high chair, and Alara dropped to her knees beside their son, her medical training kicking in even as her mother's heart broke. "Call 911, she commanded, her voice steady despite the terror in her eyes as she turned Sebastian onto his side and checked his airway. Tobias had faced boardroom crises, hostile takeovers, and million-dollar disasters, but nothing had prepared him for the helpless panic of watching his child's body betray him. His hands shook as he dialed, his voice cracking as he gave the dispatcher their address. "How long has he been seizing?" the dispatcher asked. 2 minutes, Ilara called out, her eyes never leaving Sebastian's face. "Maybe 3. Is he breathing?" "Yes, but it's shallow. We need them here now." The ambulance arrived in 6 minutes that felt like 6 hours. As the paramedics worked over Sebastian's small form, now unconscious but breathing steadily, Tobias found himself making promises to a god he wasn't sure he believed in. He would give up everything, his company, his wealth, his pride, if Sebastian would just be okay. In the emergency room at Brooklyn Methodist Hospital, they were thrust into a nightmare of medical terminology, urgent consultations, and waiting. Oliver had been taken to Ilara's neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez, leaving Tobias and Ilara alone with their fears in a sterile room that smelled of disinfectant and desperation. "This is my fault," Ilara whispered, staring at her hands. "I should have seen the signs. I should have known something was wrong." "How could you have known?" Tobias asked, reaching for her hand. "You've been doing everything right. You've been incredible." She pulled away from his touch. "Have I? Because 3 weeks ago Sebastian was stable. 3 weeks ago his symptoms were manageable. Then you came back into our lives, disrupting our routine, changing everything, and now, you think I caused this?" The accusation hung between them like a toxic cloud. Ilara's face crumpled and she pressed her hands to her mouth as if she could take back the words. "I don't know what I think anymore," she said through her fingers. "I just know that my baby is in there fighting for his life, and I can't help him." Dr. Chen arrived an hour later, his face grave as he reviewed Sebastian's chart and the preliminary test results. When he finally spoke, his words confirmed Tobias's worst fears. "Sebastian has developed hydrocephalus, fluid buildup in his brain. It's a complication we've been monitoring since his diagnosis, but the onset was faster than we anticipated." "What does that mean?" Tobias asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. "It means he needs surgery. Immediately. We need to insert a shunt to drain the excess fluid and relieve the pressure on his brain." Ilara made a sound that was part sob, part prayer. "How dangerous is it?" Dr. Chen's hesitation told them everything. Any brain surgery carries risks, especially in a child Sebastian's age. But without the surgery, the pressure will continue to build, potentially causing permanent brain damage or, worse. The unspoken word, death, filled the space between them. "I need to call Dr. Hartwell in London," Ilara said suddenly. "He's the specialist who treated Sebastian before. Maybe there's an alternative." "Ilara," Dr. Chen interrupted gently. "I've already consulted with Dr. Hartwell. We're in agreement. This is Sebastian's best chance." The consent forms felt like signing their son's life away. Page after page of risks and complications, percentages that didn't capture the magnitude of what they were facing. Tobias watched Ilara's hand tremble as she signed, and he realized that for all his wealth and influence he was as powerless as any other parent in this situation. "I can't do this," Ilara whispered as they wheeled Sebastian toward the operating room. Their little boy looked impossibly small on the gurney, his face peaceful in medicated sleep, unaware of the battle being waged for his future. "Yes, you can," Tobias said, wrapping his arms around her as Sebastian disappeared behind the surgical doors. "We can. Together." But even as he said the words, he felt Ilara pulling away from him emotionally, retreating behind the walls she had built to protect herself from exactly this kind of pain. The surgery took 4 hours. 4 hours of pacing the waiting room, drinking terrible coffee, and pretending to read magazines while their minds raced with worst-case scenarios. Tobias called his office twice to cancel meetings before realizing that he didn't care about any of it. His entire world was in an operating room fighting for life. "I keep thinking about all the things I didn't do," Ilara said during the 3rd hour. "All the bedtime stories I was too tired to read, all the times I was impatient with him for taking too long to put on his shoes." "You're an amazing mother," Tobias said firmly. "Sebastian knows how much you love him." "Do I love him enough?" The question came out broken, desperate, because sometimes when I'm dealing with all the therapy appointments and medications and sleepless nights, sometimes I wonder what our lives would have been like if he'd been born healthy. And then I hate myself for even thinking that. Tobias felt his throat close up. He had wondered the same thing, not about loving Sebastian less, but about the complexity of loving a child whose needs were so much greater than those of typical children. The guilt that came with that wondering was crushing. "That doesn't make you a bad mother," he said. "That makes you human." When Dr. Chen finally emerged from the surgical suite, Still in his scrubs, his expression was carefully neutral. Tobias and Ilara stood simultaneously, bracing themselves for news that would either save or destroy them. "The surgery went well," he said, and Ilara's knees buckled with relief. Tobias caught her, holding her steady as Dr. Chen continued. "We've successfully placed the shunt, and the initial pressure readings are very encouraging. Sebastian's brain function appears to be unaffected. Can we see him?" Ilara asked, tears streaming down her face. "He's in recovery now. He'll be sedated for several more hours, but yes, you can see him shortly." As they followed a nurse down the hallway toward the pediatric ICU, Tobias felt a strange mixture of relief and foreboding. Sebastian had survived the immediate crisis, but the future remained uncertain. More surgeries might be necessary. The shunt could malfunction. Their son would face challenges for the rest of his life. But when they saw Sebastian lying in the hospital bed, pale but breathing steadily, his small chest rising and falling with mechanical precision, Tobias felt something solidify inside him. This was his son, his family. Whatever came next, whatever challenges they faced, he would be here for all of it. "I want to stay with him tonight," Ilara said, settling into the chair beside Sebastian's bed. "We'll both stay," Tobias corrected. She looked at him with eyes that held a mixture of gratitude and something else. Fear, perhaps, or resignation. "Tobias, I need to tell you something." The serious tone of her voice made his stomach clench. "What is it?" "Before Sebastian's surgery, I called a lawyer. I started the process to have you legally recognized as the boy's father, to establish formal custody arrangements and child support." The words hit him like a physical blow. Why? Because if something had happened to Sebastian today, if he hadn't survived the surgery, I wanted to make sure Oliver would have his father. I wanted to make sure there were legal protections in place, that you couldn't just walk away again when things got difficult. Tobias stared at her, processing the implications. Even in the midst of the crisis, even while facing the possibility of losing one child, she had been thinking about protecting the other. The depth of her strength and foresight humbled him. "And if I had said no? If I had refused to sign the papers?" Ilara's smile was sad, knowing. "Then I would have known that everything these past 3 weeks was just you playing house until the novelty wore off." The accusation stung because 3 weeks ago it might have been true. 3 weeks ago he might have been attracted to the idea of family without fully understanding the weight of responsibility that came with it. "I'll sign whatever papers you need," he said. "But not because you're forcing me to. Because Sebastian is my son and Oliver is my son and you are." He paused, searching for words that could capture the complexity of what she meant to him. "You are the strongest, most remarkable woman I've ever known, and I'm grateful that you're willing to let me be part of this family." As they sat vigil beside their son's hospital bed, watching machines monitor his vital signs and waiting for him to wake up, Tobias realized that this was what love really meant. Not the grand gestures or passionate declarations, but the quiet commitment to show up for the hard days, to hold each other's fears, to choose each other again and again, even when everything felt uncertain. When Sebastian's eyes finally fluttered open 12 hours later, the first word he spoke was barely a whisper. "Daddy?" And Tobias knew with absolute certainty that no boardroom victory, no business triumph, no amount of wealth could ever compare to the simple miracle of being there to answer, "I'm here, buddy. Daddy's here." 6 months after Sebastian's surgery, Tobias stood in the conference room of Morrow Enterprises, facing the most important decision of his life. But this time it wasn't about mergers or acquisitions. It was about choosing between the empire he had built and the family he couldn't imagine living without. The emergency board meeting had been called by his investors, led by his former mentor, Charles Whitmore, whose weathered face showed disappointment as he slid a folder across the mahogany table. "These are Sebastian's medical expenses for the past 6 months, Charles said gravely. $1.2 million, Tobias. And according to Dr. Chen's projections, we're looking at another 2 to 3 million over the next 5 years. Around the table, board members shifted uncomfortably. These were men and women who had supported Tobias through every business challenge. But the personal had become very public when Sebastian's surgery had required emergency funds from the company's medical benefits program. "Your personal obligations are affecting the company's bottom line," added board member Margaret Foster, her voice not unkind but firm. "The shareholders are beginning to ask questions." Tobias remained standing, his hands clasped behind his back as he studied the faces around the table. People who had been colleagues, friends, allies. Now they were looking at him as if he had become a liability. "What are you asking me to do?" he said quietly. Charles opened another folder. We're prepared to offer you a generous buyout package. You keep your personal assets, your investment portfolio, enough to ensure comfortable lives for your family. But you step down as CEO and sell your controlling interest in the company. You're forcing me out. We're offering you a choice. Margaret corrected. Continue down this path, bankrupting yourself and potentially the company for one child's medical needs, or accept that sometimes love means making practical decisions. The words hit him like a physical blow. Practical decisions. 6 months ago he might have agreed with them. 6 months ago he might have seen Sebastian's medical needs as a burden rather than simply part of loving his son. I need time to consider this, he said. You have until tomorrow morning, Charles replied. The vote is scheduled for 9 a.m. Tobias left the building in a daze. As his driver navigated the familiar streets toward Brooklyn, he thought about the man he had been when this all started. Someone who measured worth in stock prices and quarterly reports, who believed that success meant accumulation and control. He found Alara at Sebastian's physical therapy session, watching their son work with determination that made Tobias's chest tight with pride. 6 months post-surgery, Sebastian was exceeding every expectation. He walked with barely noticeable hesitation. His speech had improved dramatically, and his cognitive development was progressing beautifully. The little boy who had once struggled to climb stairs now navigated the therapy equipment with confidence. "Look, Daddy," Sebastian called out, successfully completing a balance exercise that had been impossible just months before. "I did it." "You sure did, buddy," Tobias said, scooping him up for a hug. Over Sebastian's head, he met Alara's eyes and saw the question there. She could read his mood like she always had. After therapy, they picked up Oliver from daycare and headed home to the house Tobias had bought for them 3 months ago, a modest but comfortable place in Park Slope with a backyard where the boys could play safely. It wasn't the penthouse mansion of his former life, but it was filled with something more valuable: laughter, crayon drawings on the refrigerator, and the chaos of a real family. The board met today, he told Alara as they prepared dinner together, a routine that had become sacred to him. Her hand stilled on the vegetables she was chopping. "And they want me to choose, the company or the family." Alara set down her knife and turned to face him fully. "What did you tell them?" "That I needed time to think." She studied his face with the intensity that had first attracted him to her 7 years ago. "Do you need time to think?" The question hung between them, loaded with the weight of everything they had been through. In the living room, they could hear Sebastian reading a story to Oliver, his voice patient and gentle as he helped his younger brother with the difficult words. 3 years ago, I thought losing you was the worst thing that could happen to me, Tobias said. I convinced myself that if I just built the company bigger, made more money, achieved more success, the emptiness would go away. Did it work? For a while, I thought it did. But the night Sebastian had his surgery, sitting in that waiting room, I realized that none of it mattered. The money, the power, the recognition, all of it was meaningless compared to the possibility of losing him. Alara moved closer, close enough that he could see the flecks of gold in her green eyes. "So what's your answer?" "I don't know how to be anything other than successful," he admitted. "I don't know who I am without the company, without the achievement." "You're Sebastian and Oliver's father," she said simply. "You're the man who learned to braid hair and read bedtime stories. You're the person who sleeps on our couch 3 nights a week because Sebastian has nightmares and needs you there. You're the man I'm falling in love with all over again." The word stopped his heart. In 6 months of rebuilding their relationship, of learning to be a family, she had never said anything about love. They had been careful, cautious, taking things day by day. "Alara, I know we haven't talked about it," she continued, her voice stronger now. "I know we've been focused on the boys, on Sebastian's recovery, on just figuring out how to be in the same room together. But somewhere between that first night when you stayed up with Oliver's fever, and last week when you carried Sebastian to bed after his therapy session, I realized that I never stopped loving you. I just stopped believing that we could make it work. And now I think we're both different people than we were 3 years ago. Better people. Stronger people." She reached for his hands. "The question is, do you believe we can make it work?" Before he could answer, Sebastian appeared in the doorway, his small face serious. "Daddy, are you going away again?" The question came from a place of deep intuition that children possessed. Sebastian couldn't have understood the business discussion, but he had sensed the tension, the possibility of loss. Tobias knelt down to Sebastian's level. "Why would you ask that, buddy? You look sad." And sometimes when people look sad, they go away. The simple honesty of the observation broke something open in Tobias's chest. He thought about all the times in his life when he had chosen the easier path, the safer option, the decision that protected his pride rather than his heart. "Sebastian, can I tell you something important?" The little boy nodded solemnly. "Sometimes grown-ups have to make big decisions about what's most important to them. And you know what's most important to me?" "What?" "You and Oliver and Mommy. Being your daddy. Being part of this family. That's the most important job I'll ever have." Sebastian's face lit up with a smile that could have powered the city. "So you're staying?" "I'm staying," Tobias promised, looking up at Alara as he said it. Forever. That night, after the boys were asleep, Tobias and Alara sat on the back porch, sharing a bottle of wine and watching the stars emerge over Brooklyn. "You'll miss it," she said quietly. "The company, the power, the rush of closing big deals." "Maybe," he admitted. "But I won't miss being the kind of man who could walk away from his family when things got difficult." "What will you do instead?" Tobias smiled, thinking of the plans that had been forming in his mind for weeks. "I'm going to start a foundation for families dealing with medical crises like Sebastian's. Use my experience, my contacts, my resources to help other parents who are facing impossible choices between financial survival and their children's health." Ilara turned to stare at him. "Tobias, that's incredible. I've been talking to Dr. Chen about it. There are so many families struggling with exactly what we went through. Children who need specialized care, parents who are forced to choose between bankruptcy and their child's future. I want to change that. It won't make you rich." "I'm already rich," he said, gesturing toward the house where their children slept peacefully. "I have everything that matters." As if summoned by their conversation, Oliver's cry came through the baby monitor. Alara started to get up, but Tobias touched her arm gently. "Let me," he said. In Oliver's room, he found his younger son standing in his crib, tears streaming down his face from a bad dream. The moment Oliver saw his father, he reached up with both arms, seeking comfort. "It's okay, buddy," Tobias murmured, lifting him up. "Daddy's here." As he rocked Oliver back to sleep, Tobias thought about the board meeting tomorrow, about the choice he would have to announce. It should have been difficult, should have required agonizing consideration of pros and cons. Instead, it was the easiest decision he had ever made. The next morning, wearing a simple suit instead of his usual designer attire, Tobias walked into the Morrow Enterprises conference room for the last time as CEO. The board members were already assembled, their faces expectant and slightly sympathetic, as if they knew what his decision would be. "Gentlemen, ladies," he began, standing at the head of the table where he had presided over countless meetings, "I want to thank you for everything we've accomplished together. This company has been my life for 15 years. Charles nodded approvingly, clearly expecting resignation. "Which is why," Tobias continued, "it's time for me to have an actual life." He placed his resignation letter on the table, along with the paperwork transferring his shares to the employee stock ownership plan he had secretly been developing. "I'm not selling to outside investors," he announced. "I'm giving my controlling interest to the people who actually built this company, the employees. Every person who works here, from the janitors to the senior executives, will now own a piece of what they help create every day." The room erupted in shocked murmurs. Charles looked apoplectic. "Tobias, you can't be serious. You're giving away billions." "I'm investing in something more valuable than money," Tobias interrupted. "I'm investing in the belief that success isn't measured by what you accumulate, but by what you give back." As he walked out of the building, ignoring the protests and demands for reconsideration, Tobias felt lighter than he had in years. His phone buzzed with a text from Alara. "Sebastian wants to know if you'll be home for lunch. He's making you a picture." He typed back quickly, "I'll be home in 20 minutes, and I'm never leaving again." Standing on the sidewalk outside the building that had defined his identity for so long, Tobias looked up at the sky and felt something he hadn't experienced since he was a child. Absolute certainty that he was exactly where he belonged. Tomorrow, he would start building something new. Not an empire, but a legacy. Not for personal gain, but for the belief that every child deserved the chance Sebastian had received, that every family deserved the support they had needed. But today he was going home to have lunch with his sons and the woman he loved, and that was the only success that mattered. 2 years later, the morning sun streamed through the kitchen windows of the Morrow family home in Park Slope, illuminating the cheerful chaos that had become Tobias's favorite part of every day. Sebastian, now 4.5, sat at the breakfast table methodically arranging his cereal by color while explaining to his younger brother the importance of proper organization. "See, Oliver, the red ones go here because they're like fire trucks, and fire trucks are brave," Sebastian said with the serious tone of a much older child. Oliver, who had just turned 4 and possessed the boundless energy of a tiny tornado, was more interested in seeing how many pieces of cereal he could fit in his mouth at once. His cheeks bulged comically as he grinned at his father, who was attempting to braid their sister's hair at the kitchen counter. "Hold still, princess," Tobias murmured to 6-month-old Isabella, whose dark hair was finally long enough for tiny ponytails. She gurgled happily, reaching for his face with chubby fingers that had recently discovered the joy of grabbing everything within reach. "You're getting better at that," Alara observed, entering the kitchen in her scrubs. 2 years of rebuilding their relationship had led to remarriage 8 months ago, and 6 months later, they had welcomed Isabella, a surprise that had filled their home with even more joy and even less sleep. "I've had excellent teachers," Tobias replied, securing the tiny elastic with the concentration of a man performing surgery. "Sebastian showed me the YouTube tutorial." "YouTube tutorial?" Ilara laughed, the sound filling the kitchen with warmth. "Since when do you watch hair tutorials?" "Since I realized that being a father means learning things I never thought I'd need to know," he said, successfully completing Isabella's first official ponytail. "Last week it was how to get Play-Doh out of carpet. This week it's hair accessories for babies." Sebastian looked up from his cereal arrangement. "Next week, Daddy's going to learn how to braid friendship bracelets for my school project." "Is he now?" Ilara asked, kissing the top of Sebastian's head. "I volunteered," Tobias said solemnly. Apparently fathers who can braid are very impressive to 4-year-olds. The easy banter between them was something Tobias never took for granted. 2 years ago, they had been strangers learning to trust each other again. Now they moved through their morning routine with the synchronized efficiency of a couple who had chosen each other daily, through sleepless nights and medical appointments, through toddler tantrums and the profound joy of watching their children thrive. Sebastian's recovery had exceeded every medical expectation. The little boy who had once struggled with basic motor skills now rode a bicycle, played soccer with modified rules, and attended mainstream preschool where his teachers described him as remarkably resilient and kind. The shunt was still there, would always be there, but it had become simply part of who Sebastian was rather than a limitation defining his life. "I have to leave for the hospital in 10 minutes, Ilara said, refilling her coffee cup. "Mrs. Rodriguez will be here at 8 to watch Isabella, and the boys' pickup is at 3:30. "I'll get them," Tobias said automatically. The foundation board meeting was moved to tomorrow. 2 years after walking away from Morrow Enterprises, the Sebastian Morrow Foundation for Pediatric Medical Support had become Tobias's greatest professional achievement. What had started as a personal mission to help families facing medical crises had grown into a national organization that had already assisted over 3,000 children and their families. The foundation provided emergency financial assistance, connected families with specialized care, and advocated for policy changes that made healthcare more accessible for children with complex medical needs. "How's the new family in Boston?" Ilara asked, referencing the case that had been keeping Tobias up at night recently. 7-year-old girl with a rare genetic condition. The parents have been told she needs experimental treatment that insurance won't cover. Sound familiar? His voice carried the weight of memory, but also the determination that had driven him for 2 years. "What's the foundation covering?" "Everything. Treatment, travel expenses, lodging for the family during the 6-month protocol. Dr. Hartwell in London is consulting on the case." Ilara paused in packing her lunch, looking at him with the expression that still made his heart skip beats. "You know what I love most about what you do now?" "What?" "You're not just changing one family's life. You're changing how the system works for everyone." It was true. The foundation's advocacy work had already led to changes in insurance coverage requirements in 12 states. Tobias had testified before Congress twice, sharing Sebastian's story and arguing for legislative changes that would prevent families from facing impossible choices between financial ruin and their children's health. "Speaking of changing lives," Tobias said, settling Isabella in her high chair and handing her a soft toy, "I got a call yesterday from Marcus." "Marcus from your old company?" "The employee stock ownership plan has made everyone millionaires. Turns out that when people own the company they work for, they're incredibly motivated to make it successful." Ilara smiled. So you're saying that giving away your billion-dollar company was a good investment? Best decision I ever made, he said, then corrected himself. Second best decision I ever made. What was the first? Coming to that divorce meeting 2 years ago instead of sending my lawyer. The reminder of how they had started this journey made them both quiet for a moment. So much had changed since that day when Tobias had expected to finalize their divorce, and instead discovered he was a father. Sebastian's initial health crisis, the hostile takeover attempt, Victoria's manipulations, the surgery that had tested their fragile reunion, all of it felt like a lifetime ago. "Daddy," Oliver said, climbing down from his chair and tugging on Tobias's shirt. "Can you come to show and tell today? I want to show my friends my daddy." The simple request made Tobias's throat tight with emotion. Oliver, who had no memory of life before his father's return, took for granted what had once seemed impossible. A dad who was present, involved, available for the small moments that mattered most. "What time is show and tell, buddy?" "After lunchtime, Mrs. Peterson says I can bring something special to share with the class." "And you want to bring me?" Oliver nodded enthusiastically. "Because you're the most special thing I have." Ilara pressed her hand to her mouth, her eyes filling with tears. Even after 2 years, moments like these could overwhelm them with gratitude for what they had found together. "I'll be there," Tobias promised, lifting Oliver up for a hug. "I wouldn't miss it." As Ilara prepared to leave for her shift at Brooklyn Methodist, where she had returned to nursing after taking time off during Sebastian's recovery, she paused to watch her family. Tobias was now feeding Isabella while simultaneously helping Sebastian sound out words from his favorite book and listening to Oliver's elaborate plans for show and tell. The scene was chaotic and beautiful, exactly the kind of life she had dreamed of during those long, lonely years as a single mother. "I love you," she said, kissing Tobias goodbye with the same intensity she had felt as a newlywed, but with the deeper appreciation that came from nearly losing it all. "I love you too," he replied. "All of you. Always." After Ilara left for work, Tobias settled into the morning routine that had become sacred to him. Sebastian's physical therapy exercises in the living room, during which Oliver tried to copy every movement. Isabella's tummy time on a blanket, while both boys provided commentary on her progress. The careful administration of Sebastian's medications, now reduced to just 2 daily doses that barely registered as an inconvenience. At 10 o'clock, his phone rang with a call that had become routine but never lost its significance. "Good morning. This is Dr. Chen's office calling with Sebastian's quarterly appointment reminder." "Thank you," Tobias said. "We'll see you next Wednesday at 2 o'clock. "And Mr. Morrow, Dr. Chen asked me to tell you that Sebastian's latest scans continue to show excellent progression. The shunt is functioning perfectly, and his developmental markers are all within normal ranges." Each positive report felt like a small miracle. 2 years ago, they had been told to prepare for a lifetime of challenges. Today, Sebastian was thriving in ways that defied every dire prediction. That afternoon at Oliver's preschool show and tell, Tobias sat in a tiny chair surrounded by curious 4-year-olds as his son proudly introduced him to the class. "This is my daddy," Oliver announced with the confidence of someone presenting a priceless treasure. He used to have a really big building with his name on it, but now he helps sick kids get better. And he makes the best pancakes in the whole world. And he never goes away, even when things are hard. The teacher, Mrs. Peterson, smiled as the other children asked questions about Tobias's work with the foundation. He found himself explaining, in preschool appropriate terms, how sometimes families needed help when their children were sick, and how grown-ups could work together to make sure no child had to go without the care they needed. "So you're like a superhero?" asked a little girl named Emma. "No," Oliver corrected seriously. "He's better than a superhero. He's a daddy." That evening, as they sat around the dinner table, all 5 of them together, healthy and whole, Tobias reflected on the man he had been 2 years ago. That version of himself would have found this life impossibly small, would have felt suffocated by the routine of family dinners and bedtime stories and weekend trips to the park. Now he couldn't imagine anything more expansive than this love, more successful than this happiness. "Daddy," Sebastian said, breaking into his thoughts. "I have something to tell you." "What's that, buddy?" Sebastian's face was serious, the way it got when he was processing something important. "At school today, Tommy said his daddy travels for work all the time and misses lots of stuff. And I told him that my daddy used to be like that, but now he chooses to stay home with us." "And what did Tommy say?" "He said he wishes his daddy would choose that too." Sebastian paused, considering his words carefully. It made me feel sad for Tommy, but also really happy for us. Across the table, Ilara's eyes met Tobias's, and in that look was the acknowledgement of what they had built together. Not just a family, but a way of living that prioritized presence over prestige, connection over conquest. Later that night, after the children were asleep and he and Ilara were cleaning up the kitchen together, Tobias's phone buzzed with an email that made him stop mid-rinse. "What is it?" Ilara asked, noticing his expression. "An invitation to speak at the World Economic Forum about family-centered business practices. They want me to keynote a session on redefining success in corporate leadership. Will you do it?" Tobias considered the opportunity, a chance to share Sebastian's story, to advocate for policies that supported working families, to influence other business leaders who might be struggling with similar choices. "Only if you and the kids can come with me. The foundation can cover the travel expenses, and I think Sebastian would love to see Switzerland." Ilara smiled, the expression that had captured his heart 7 years ago and continued to inspire him every day. "I think that sounds perfect." As they finished the dishes and prepared for bed, Tobias thought about the speech he might give at the forum. He would talk about the night Sebastian was born prematurely, about the years he had missed while building an empire, about the morning his son had called him daddy for the first time. He would share the truth he had learned, that success without family was just expensive loneliness, that power without love was just elaborate emptiness. But mostly he would talk about choice, the daily decision to show up, to be present, to choose love over fear, connection over control, family over everything else that the world insisted was more important. Standing in the doorway of Isabella's nursery, watching his daughter sleep peacefully in her crib, Tobias felt the weight and wonder of responsibility settle around him like a blessing. 3 children who trusted him completely, a wife who had given him a second chance he had never deserved, a life filled with ordinary moments that felt extraordinary because they were shared. He thought about the man who had sat in a conference room 2 years ago, furious about signing divorce papers, completely unaware that his life was about to begin. That man had measured worth in dollars and success in deals closed, and importance in buildings that bore his name. This man measured worth in bedtime stories and scraped knees kissed better, and the sound of his children laughing. This man knew that success was Sebastian reading his first book independently, Oliver's proud announcement at Show and Tell, Isabella's first smile when she saw his face. As he turned off the lights and headed toward the bedroom where Ilara waited, Tobias whispered a prayer of gratitude for the woman who had never stopped believing in the possibility of family, even when he had given up on it entirely. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, foundation work that mattered, children who needed him, a marriage that required daily tending. But tonight, surrounded by the quiet peace of his sleeping family, Tobias Morrow knew with absolute certainty that he had found the only success that truly counted, a life built on love, sustained by choice, and measured in moments that money could never buy. In the end, the billionaire who had expected to sign divorce papers had discovered something far more valuable than any fortune. He had found his way home. What choice would you have made in Tobias's position? The empire you built or the family you discovered? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your participation means a lot to the channel. Please share your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe to our channel and leave a comment below letting us know what you thought. Your feedback and support mean a lot to us. Stay tuned for more exciting stories.